place where our world meets the next, where the living mingle with the dead. Your experiences, your stories. Why not stay a while and join us on a fantastic journey to the other side?
Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Phantastic podcast. As always, if you would like to have your story featured on one of our podcasts, you can email it to fantasticpodcasts@outlook.com. That's fantasticpodcast@outlook.com. You can send your stories through in either text form or in an audio file, which will be played on a later episode of the podcast. We've got a few stories that have been sent in today, 2 by text form and 2 in audio form. So without further ado, I'm going to play you the first audio story now. It comes through from an Amanda Rendell, and I'll let her tell you it in her own words.
Yeah, I'm totally freaked out right now. I've got Magic Mike ready to play because I know that'll take my mind off of everything here in just a few minutes. And it was a little weird. So the way that the freeway, they changed it. It's since been changed, but the way the freeway used to go is it would come down and it was like an intersection. So it was like 2 freeways and yeah. All right, so you're driving and you would go down and loop under and to like merge onto the other freeway. So it was weird. It was in a place that was like secluded. You couldn't really like get to it, but I mean you had to be like on the freeway because it was kind of like a tunnel, if that makes sense in a way. Yeah, so we were I feel so ridiculous. And I'm getting all weird because it was weird. Okay, so we were driving down and looped around the tunnel, and there's a woman who was standing there, and the only way, God, I've totally got the heebie-jeebies. The only way that I can really describe her is to say she was there, but wasn't really there. It looked to me, I'm seriously, okay, so it looked to me like she was like leaning up against like a car, but there wasn't anything there. It was just the way that like it looked like she was leaning. She had really like long, I hate to say flowy, but she's very flowy. Thank you, Caliber. Kind of a little bit transparentish. Yeah, you guys are gonna think I'm complete lunatic. So anyways, we come up and we're merging on the other freeway, and my husband and I were both stunned. And I think he said, maybe I said it, I don't know. Did you see her? And I'm like, oh my God, you saw her too? Or I don't even remember which way. This was probably like 8 or 9 years ago. So we both saw this woman. Well, we get off the freeway instantly because we wanted to get back on and see if we could see her. And in the amount of time, it was fast to get off the freeway and get back on the freeway. If there was actually somebody there, we both know that we saw there was somebody there. There was something there. Oh, creepy. Oh, so she was like standing there. Well, by the time I got off the freeway and got back on, if somebody had been walking, they wouldn't have even probably like been all the way out of like this underpass. There's the right word for it. At that time. So, but she was gone. When we went back through again, she was gone. Oh, crazy. All right. Now that I'm all like freaked out. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. It was just, I don't know. And honestly, if my husband hadn't seen her either, I don't know if I would believe that I really saw somebody, if that makes sense. I would question myself forever, but we both saw her. We were both stunned for kind of like a minute. I think both of our wheels were just turning like, what did you just see? Because it was like somebody was there, but they weren't there. All right.
Thank you, Amanda. Yes, some spooky stuff there. I also like the fact that there was either a dog or a cat scratching itself in the middle of your story there. Brilliant that you didn't edit that out, or try again. Big cat lover. So, freeway ghost. We don't call them freeways over here, we call them motorways. But yeah, it's not uncommon to see spirits on the side of the road while driving past. You know, a lot of deaths are caused on the road either by people being run over by cars or motorcycles or things like that. Now, you said the freeway was like a tunnel, so I'm assuming that it, if there was a ghost, it probably would have been the ghost of a woman who had maybe had a crash or been run over, or even just been driving along and then had a heart attack. You never know. But yeah, driving deaths are usually quite abrupt, quite violent, quite untimely deaths. There's nobody plans to die while driving somewhere. Nobody gets in the car and goes, right, today I'll go to Tesco's, get some shopping. Other supermarkets are available. Or go into the bank and get my money out, and then on the way home I think I'll have a lovely crash. No, I don't think that generally happens. Apologies, of course, to anybody who has relatives or has been in an accident themselves. There's no way to go, and I can imagine it's not a very nice thing to happen. But yes, onto your ghost story. Yeah, it sounds on the level to me. I mean, if you and your husband both saw the same woman standing on the side of the road, I don't really know what advice I can give you for that one, other than I think you did the right thing on going back and checking to see if she was still there when you turned around, which she wasn't. And I assume there were no other cars around that she could have easily hopped into a car and gone for a joyride. I don't know who would have picked up a ghost anyway. Some people might. But yeah, I don't really know what advice I can give you other than the fact that yes, I think you saw a spirit. On the subject of spirits on the side of the road, I believe it was my auntie. She was telling me she was driving through a small village in the middle of Dorset a while ago. Say a while ago. It was about 20 years ago, I think, because I was a child at the time that she told me this. And she was driving along a small country lane and saw a woman standing in the middle of the road. And when she slowed down to see if she was alright, she just vanished. So yeah, I think road ghosts are quite a common occurrence. If anybody else has had any experiences with seeing spirits on the road, or while you've been driving, I'd be interested to hear about that as well. But no, that was quite interesting. Thank you very much, Amanda. Okay, so that was our first audio story. I'm going to go right ahead now and get into our first written story of the day. And this has been sent in by somebody called Lonely Pink Bubble, which I think is a contender once again for one of my favourite names on here. And he's telling us about a spirit in his girlfriend's house. Okay, so here we go. 2 months ago, I was at my girlfriend's house, and I was in my bed on the phone watching my girlfriend salt each corner of her room before vacuuming it up. I was unsure of why she was doing it, but I figured she was paranoid because she had been watching a lot of scary movies at the time. My girlfriend then left the room to go and do something. After she'd been gone for a while, I saw a large black uneven shadow outside the door. I got scared and hid under the covers. Whatever was there, I almost definitely did not want to see it. I then listened to music to calm myself down. When I heard my girlfriend open the back door, I paused my music, but then something screamed at me outside the blanket. It was a female scream, no doubt. Luckily, my girlfriend entered the room about 5 minutes after. I didn't tell her what happened till the next day, to which she said that I was just imagining things because she salted the room earlier. Me and my girlfriend have since heard female giggles in the same bedroom and her bathroom, and I've occasionally felt a dark presence in the room, but most of the time I feel safe in her bedroom. Is there any ideas of what type of entity spirit this could be? Did she not do the cleansing right? Should I be worried? And can I have some advice, please? Well, yes, Lonely Pink Bolt, you certainly can have some advice. As for cleansing, salt's not really the way to do it. A lot of people believe that salts ward off all spirits. No, salt wards off evil spirits. If it's not an evil spirit, then salt's going to have no effect. The only way you can cleanse all spirits is by either asking them to leave. What I tend to do is concentrate very, very hard if there's a spirit that is giving me problems, which I have every now and then. I've sort of learnt to concentrate and almost focus my energy out of myself. So the way I could explain to how to do it to you would be if you sit perfectly still and you almost feel yourself, if that makes sense. You can feel your muscles relax and everything. But there's something else there. You can feel your conscience, your soul, if you will. What I tend to do is I focus on that feeling. I focus on my feeling of self and project it outwardly. That's the only way I can really describe it. That seems to do the trick for me, as I don't really want to go running around the house burning sage, because it's not a nice smell. But no, so she didn't do the cleansing correctly, in my opinion, because I don't think it was an evil spirit screaming and giggling, and a girl's voice just could be a little girl, which, just they scream, they giggle, that's what they do. And as for the large black shadow, again, incorporeal, doesn't really have much size. It could be the size of a teaspoon, the size of a tank. It's just a cloud. But yeah, again, don't think there's anything really to worry about there. I think you've got a playful child ghost. At best, at worst, you've got a playful teenage ghost. Either way, I wouldn't be too worried about them. I would advise you, if you do want to get rid of it, to go down the route of outwardly projecting your consciousness, or, if you must, burn sage, but no, salt won't do anything, as it's not an evil spirit. So, yes. Thank you very much for that one. Okay, so moving right along, I shall now tell you our next written story that has been sent in by Friend Comprehensive, which is a nice name. Right, this one's quite a long one, so bear with me a moment to get my bearings. I'm still not sure if I'm a believer, but I do admit I love some true horror, and I wanted to share one encounter I truly cannot explain. I was a scout with Scouting Ireland from age 12 to 16, and one of our most frequently used campsite was Larch Hill in the Wicklow Mountains. The scout leaders like to tell us scary stories about a woman who haunted the area, most commonly referred to as the Lady of Larch Hill. Kind of unimaginative, if you ask me. I wasn't exactly a believer at the time, and brushed off the stories as just that. I'm going to briefly describe the layout of the campsite. When you drive into the entrance of the campsite, there's a big gravel car park, with the welcome centre and bathrooms to your right. Straight ahead, there's a gravel path that has entrances to fields left and right of it. On this particular occasion, we were camping at the very back field to the right of the path. There was no lighting installed anywhere in the campsite, apart from the bathrooms and outside of the welcome centre, lighting the car park. So this particular weekend, I must have been 15 at the time. We're camping in the back field. The mess tent is up near the entrance to the field, which leads out onto the path that goes towards the car park. It faces out towards mountains, and to the left of the mess tent, at the base of the field, surrounded on one side by trees and bush, were our tents. At the time, there were 4 girls camping, 2 two-man tents and a few boys' tents scattered around us. Me and my best friend were sharing a tent, and we had gotten into a pointless argument that evening, but I was scared of walking around the campsite on my own in the dark. So that night, after everyone had long gone to bed, I asked her to come to the bathrooms, which were a 15-minute walk away from the campsite with me. She wasn't talking to me and walked about 6 feet in front of me, and I sheepishly followed behind. We walked without torches towards the mess tent, as it had a single light hanging from the rail outside of it, lighting the campsite. As we approached it, I walked looking at the ground, because I didn't want to trip over the tree roots and camping gear that may have been left out for the next morning. I noticed the shadow of a girl to my left, maybe 3 feet behind me. I automatically assumed one of the other girls had heard us leave and was in the same position as me, and scared to walk to the bathroom on her own at night, so I turned around, but there was no one there. When I looked down, the shadow was still there. I remember distinctly thinking it was the shadow of a girl, because I could make out long hair and a dress, which I'd assumed was a nightgown. It was a warm night. Looking at the shadow, back to the shadow of my friend, I noticed something. The light. The one singular source of light on a cloudy night where you couldn't see the moon or stars was hitting us from the right, and my shadow and my friend's shadow stemmed from our feet towards 10 o'clock, while this shadow seemed to be coming from nowhere. I tried to rationalize it in every way physics would allow, but I was so freaked out that I had to close my eyes and speed walk closer to my friend. We didn't say anything to each other the whole walk down, and once we had gotten past the mess tent and onto the path, we both turned our phone torches on to light the path, which was completely dark all the way up to the bathrooms. We could see lights from other campsites dotted around the place, but none were bright enough or close enough to be of any use in lighting the park. When we got to the bathrooms, I locked myself in a stall and just sat there. My heart was beating out of my chest, and I felt like if I opened the door, someone was going to be standing there waiting for me. I waited until I heard my friend flush and unlock her stall before I left mine, and I couldn't even look in the mirror as I washed my hands because I was afraid I would see something I didn't want to. We walked back to our tent and got into my sleeping bag without saying anything. I barely slept that night, trying to figure out what happened and if I saw a ghost. To this day, if people ask me if I've ever had a paranormal encounter, I think back to that shadow walking behind me. It gives me chills just writing about it now. Thank you very much, friend comprehensive. I should have said before that story that you did actually ask for it to be read in my voice, even though you are a female. How can I put this in polite words? Because you said you believed that my voice was very attractive. Thank you very much. I shall now say a few words for you if you enjoy. Pomegranate, pizza topping, and one of my favourite words, nitwit. Points if you get that reference of the last favourite word there. Yes, thank you very much for sending your story in. It was a very good read. I always enjoy stories about being out in the dark because I myself was terrified of the dark until I think I was about 13 when I finally got over that fear. I finally got over that fear when I realised I was probably the scariest thing you were going to meet in the dark. So that sort of got me out of it. But yes, I can relate to being young and in the dark and not liking it very much. I always preferred to be outside in the dark than inside, though. Didn't like being inside, like during a power cut or something, I would freak out, but outside was fine. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling. On to your story, yes, camping and shadows. Again, very interesting. I can definitely tell by the way you wrote it that you were very scared at the time that this was happening. It's not a nice thing, but I always want to say to people, isn't it nice to have seen something, to know that there's something out there? Because I know quite a few skeptics who I've proved wrong by, seeing their relatives or telling them things about themselves that I couldn't possibly have known, which their either father, mother, brother, sister, wife, or whatever else was telling me while I was talking to that person. So I do enjoy meeting skeptics, which always makes me laugh. And these skeptics go, "No, I don't believe. It doesn't exist. It can all be proved by science." Right, I agree with you on some counts, but yes, you wouldn't get the word paranormal without normal. And no, shadows following you in a campsite. Yeah, again, I could see that would be very scary. Do have one question though. If it was so dark that you couldn't see your own feet, how could you see a shadow? But then again, people have said that the ghost's shadow is darker than dark. You could turn all the lights off in a completely back room, and you'd still be able to see the outline of a person standing there. I have had my share of experience with full-on, I won't say shadow, because they had sort of I could tell that they were three-dimensional, as it were, things, but I will tell you about them on a different episode. It's probably a bit too heavy for this episode, as it's quite light-hearted, and as of yet, I haven't really had any stories sent in that would warrant the telling of such a horrific event. But yeah, no, very interesting. Thank you for your story, and I'm glad that you got out of it unscathed, and you can talk about it openly. I always like to think that this podcast opens up a door for people to talk about it openly without fear of scrutiny or anything like that. And well, you lot have definitely opened up your arms and welcomed the podcast into your lives that's sending me these stories. So thank you very much for that. Okay, on to our next story, which is our last story of this podcast, which is our next audio file, which has been sent in by a Mr. I want to say Fred, but I think that's the name of the ghost. Bear with me one moment. Mr. Mark Edgerton, that's the one. He sent this one in from my home country, England. Ooh. So let's have a listen, shall we?
Hello, my name's Mark Edgerton. I'm the owner of this house, 15 High Street, Southo, and this is my ghost story. I know the complete history of this house because my father built it in 1964. We actually lived next door prior to that, and when we moved into the building I was 3 years old. Didn't really know much about ghosts at that age, but my mother had an experience in the bedroom upstairs when she awoke in the middle of the night to find a portly man who was looking out of the window and appearing to be laughing, although no sound was heard. She was unaware whether she was actually awake, and once she'd satisfied herself that she had, fear gripped her and she dived under the covers and woke my father, who was rather disgruntled, and got up and checked the whole house and found absolutely nothing. And so it was basically dismissed as a dream. After that there was various acts of poltergeist activity, things being moved, things going missing and then reappearing, which was I was kept completely in the dark being a small child. But in the 1980s there was another sighting. My mother had got quite flippant about this sort of poltergeist that was in the house and actually affectionately used to refer to him as Fred. But in the 80s, in the dining room downstairs, we had a painter and decorator in that was wallpapering the room, and he glanced up the open plan stairway and saw a man at the top of the stairs who he assumed was up there, and my mother had sort of taken him up the stairs, and so he called up to her, only to find that she was in the living room. And so when he told her what he'd seen, they both crept up the stairs armed with the poker from the fire, expecting to find an intruder, but they found nobody at all. My first sort of real inkling of Fred that I had was when I was 14 in 1975, and this was an incident that happened in the daylight. I was in the kitchen with my mother, and she got out a couple of frozen trout from the freezer and sent me into the garden to cut some fresh parsley. In those days there were no microwave ovens, and so it was a case of leaving the fish on the side to defrost naturally. I cut the parsley and I put it next to the fish in the kitchen, and we then went out into local St Neots to do a weekly shop. When we returned, an hour and a half, 2 hours later, the parsley was missing. She queried as to whether I'd actually got the parsley in the first place, but the parsley, the scissors were still in the kitchen sink with the sort of white milky sap where I'd cut this parsley. So it had just disappeared. I think my mum figured out what had happened, but as I was only 14, she didn't really let on to me what had actually occurred. Anyway, this parsley went completely missing. And about 3 weeks later, my grandmother opened the cupboard under our dining room stairs, under the stairs, to get the hoover, and there was this pile of parsley, blackened and charred and rotten. Now that's interesting enough, but she'd been to that cupboard twice previously since the parsley went missing, because she used to come every Wednesday to clean and hoover and dust for my mother, and it was on the third week that this parsley suddenly reappeared. And that's really the sort of poltergeist type activity that was very common in the house. I left the house in 1980 when I was 19, and I moved back in here again. My mother died in 2010, and I moved back in myself in 2013. Since then we've had one incident that revolves around a watch. A watch of mine went missing. I thought the strap had perhaps broken and that I lost it, only for a month later to find it in one of the bedrooms upstairs, laid out on the floor as if presented to me, really. No idea how I could account for that. Within that month I put a flat pack wardrobe together in that room. The room had been hoovered, The bed sheets had been changed, and this watch was laid out. Nobody could have possibly have missed it. And there it was on the floor about a month later, on display for everybody to see. If I've only got one real regret, being a paranormal investigator myself, is that I've never seen Fred. I've had instances of poltergeist activity that I could probably attribute to him, but as 2 other people have actually seen him, and I live in the house, I would really like to see him myself. I live in hope. And that's really the last episode that we've had with Fred. He's an affectionate type of ghost. Nobody has ever been hurt or knowingly frightened by him, and we've come to accept him as part of the family. So whether he'll reappear again, I don't know. He seems to come and go. Time will tell. If he does, I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark. Yeah, very interesting again. Was interested to hear of poltergeist activity, and that is bona fide poltergeist activity you've got there. Things disappearing and reappearing. Also points to name in Fred, and points to Fred for disposing of parsley. Yeah. Good man for that. Yes, that definitely does sound like poltergeist activity to me. We actually have a poltergeist living with us at the moment. I haven't given her a name. I do know it's a female though. And we've never had anything vanish, but we've had a few things randomly appear that we can't account for, which I assume she's nicked from elsewhere. A few months ago, for instance, my other half had gone into the bathroom to clean up, and I was in the front room, and she called me to bring her in. I think it was a flannel. She said, "Could you bring a flannel in for me? Because the cat's covered this one in fluff." So I said, "Yes, of course I can." So I went upstairs to go and get a flannel. Anyway, the way our house is laid out, you have to walk through the kitchen and the utility room to get to the bathroom. So as I walk through the kitchen, I notice a red matchbox car sort of thing just sitting on the kitchen countertop, and I thought to myself, well, that's strange, as we don't have any matchbox cars in this house, and we don't have any children, so they wouldn't have brought them in. And there wasn't really any rational explanation for this car appearing, so I thought maybe my other half has brought it in, and just left it there, found it outside or something. So I said to her, what's with the car, when I went in to the bathroom, and she said, "What car?" And I said, "The little red matchbox car that's sitting out on the countertop." And she went, "Well, you must have put it there." I said, "But if I had put it there, I wouldn't be asking you what's with the car." And she said, "Well, I haven't put it there. I don't know what you're talking about." Anyway, after she'd finished cleaning up, she wandered into the kitchen and had a look at this car and said, "No, I've never seen this car before in my life. I have no idea where it's come from. But it now sits in pride of place somewhere." Where is it sitting pride of place? I believe it's on one of the shelves in our front room, as it was a nice little gift from our poltergeist there. She has done other things. She'll occasionally turn lights on, off, make noise, bump into stuff, knock things over. She once threw a loaf of bread across the kitchen. I don't know why. I did say, what have you got against bread? Other than that, she's knocked things over, spooked the cat, all those sorts of things. But we do have one resident ghost that I do see and have named, and I've named him Smiler, and he's a lovely old man who usually stands on our stairs, just grinning. He'll do things like he'll watch TV. Occasionally he'll wander into another room of the house and grin in there for a while. But yes, with things disappearing and reappearing for no reason, and as you say, you've been in that room before or been in that cupboard before and they haven't been there, and suddenly they do reappear. Yeah, that's definite poltergeist activity that you have there. It's also nice to hear that you're a paranormal investigator yourself. I'd love to hear some of your cases that you've done. I'd be really interested to hear about that, of course, if you're willing to share them with me and my listeners. And that wraps it up for this episode of the Phantastic Podcast. Thank you very much for listening. If you are enjoying the podcast and would like to help out in a way, I now have a Patreon, and you can subscribe and sign up to my Patreon at fantasticpodcast.com/patreon.com. And yeah, you'll be treated to a monthly bonus episode when I eventually get some Patreons. So thank you very much for listening to this episode. As always, please feel free to send in any stories / experiences / questions that you have for me, and I'll answer them to the best of my abilities. Thank you for listening, and good night, and once again, don't have nightmares.